from a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA. This is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to endure summer visits to Grandma's after she serves yet another helping of creamed corn. And now, the podcast host who would never touch cream corn because he prefers his corn on the cob and stuck in his teeth, Pete Dominic!
That's not the only reason. The other reason is cream corn is disgusting, and the fact that you open the show with it is really turning a lot of people off. I'm sorry about him, folks. He is really out of line. I'll have a talk with him. Hello and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up. Thank you very much for hitting play, for subscribing to the podcast, for rating and reviewing it on Spotify and Apple. That is a huge help, as everybody says. In case you missed yesterday, I dropped another edition of Hey, Can You Talk Real Quick? This time with student loan relief activist Melissa Byrne. Now, I just posted it on the podcast host, which then sends it out to Apple and Spotify and YouTube and everywhere else. But I did not send an email out to Patreon subscribers because I worry that you might get too much email from me. I've actually had people cancel their subscription and give a reason, too many emails. This is a daily show, so every night around midnight, I post it, usually, and then that generates an email for subscribers. And I was worried didn't want to inundate you with email. So I guess I'm not sure what to do about that. Let me know if that's annoying to you. But you can always change the settings on your Patreon subscription to not get emails or get less emails or something. The problem I've been having with subscribers is that they're not getting the emails at all. But I'm digressing. If you follow me on social media, and if you're a subscriber, you have access to the Discord. I dropped it in there. I dropped it on Facebook and Twitter. But just a little bit of housekeeping, I guess, because I'm not sure what to do in certain cases. But I might drop that. I might do another Can You Talk Real Quick tomorrow with Bill Boyle on this news about that major dam being destroyed in Ukraine and flooding Kherson, the city. So it's a crazy story, and I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow with Bill B. But jump in that Discord platform. If you're a subscriber, you should have access. If you're not in there, you're missing out. It's a fun thing to just check and see what people are saying. There's always all kinds of news being dropped and debated and discussed, and people are making friends in there too. You're never alone. I like to say that you're never alone if you're a stand-up subscriber, and that is one of the reasons, the Discord chat. And of course, our Thursday night hangouts. I look forward to seeing you this Thursday at 8 p.m. So subscribe now, patreon.com/Pete Dominic, and support the show. I've got a great guest joining me today. He's an old listener from the POTUS days on SiriusXM, who has still been following me on social media, and I love going back and forth with him on Twitter. And so a couple of weeks back, I asked him if I could give him a call because he's a really interesting guy. He is a lawyer who has worked in criminal justice space on both sides as a defender and a prosecutor, and he really understands the system and how broken it is and doesn't see a lot of hope around fixing it, except for around the edges. But I had this great conversation with him off the air, and I said, I'd love to talk to you as a guest on the show. And he was really excited to come on. His name is Eric Anderson. He is a 53-year-old black man who is a very smart lawyer, and he made for a great guest. I cannot wait to talk to him again. He's very good at this, and I think you're going to like him. That's where I get a lot of my credit from, I think, is discovering legitimate voices who are smart and funny and thoughtful. And Eric Anderson is all those things, and our conversation starts at about 17 minutes if you want to skip the news and jump right to it. But, oh Lord, was there a lot of news yesterday? Let's just see what we've got here in the headlines. Man, one of the big stories, at least here in the Northeast, was air quality because of those Canadian wildfires. New York City has had their air quality. I mean, it's really hazy. The moon was shining bright red. And where I live in Rockland County, just north of the city, it was really bad as well. It was smoky and you could smell it. And upstate New York, I was talking to Kevin Richburg. His husband, Zach, I think has asthma. He couldn't even go outside. My parents said the same thing. So it's a big story here in the Northeast. Schools limiting outdoor activities, due to poor air quality as well. Another big story from yesterday, the PGA Tour and the LIV Golf have agreed to merger. That's the Saudi Golf League, and it's created a tremendous amount of controversy and outrage. In a heated PGA Tour players meeting, they reportedly calling for the director of the PGA, Jay Monahan's resignation. People are saying the PGA Tour has gone full hypocrite in its merger with LIV Golf. Outraged 9/11 families feel completely betrayed.
It's a gut punch to wake up and read the headlines today that the PGA has turned its back on the 9/11 community. We have evidence that the kingdom has played a very strong role in murdering our loved ones on September 11th. We are not ever going to stop fighting and pursuing justice.
All right, there's one reaction. Now let's go to the Golf Channel's Brandel Chambly. Hugely disappointed with PGA's Tour decision to partner with the Saudi Golf League.
Story, Brandel, your reaction to this news and this merger today?
Well, like everyone else, when I first heard about it, I was completely shocked. I can't imagine that too many people outside of maybe the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people that were in the room that brought this merger to fruition would have known anything about it. After the shock sort of ebbed away, I was hugely disappointed. I think this is one of the saddest days in the history of professional golf. I do believe that the governing bodies, the entities, the professional entities have sacrificed their principles for profit. And then, of course, I tried to imagine what circumstances would have led to such a capitulation. I think there are 3 things likely that would have led to something like this, as Jody was just talking about previous. Intractable legal issues going on indefinitely into the future, no doubt with legal vulnerability on both sides of this issue. And the only people that stood to profit from that were the lawyers that were involved. And then, of course, I think, entanglement of the various business entities and sponsors that the PGA Tour has that have Saudi money, PIF money in them. And I think it became increasingly difficult for the PGA Tour to disentangle themselves from that scrutiny and from that criticism. And then, of course, the fact that there would be billions of dollars on the table for potentially the growth of the game globally at, I say, in the best case scenario. It could have been any one of those. It could have been a combination of all 3 of those. But at least in my view, those 3 issues were at play. And it wouldn't surprise me if that's what led to this merger.
So that is crazy news, getting a lot of attention in the yesterday's news cycle, as it should. Outrageous. Just disgusting. I mean, you don't have to know anything about golf. All you have to know is about you shouldn't partner with the Saudis. I mean, why not partner with Putin? It's just preposterous. I am disgusted by it. But, to be fair, I'm pretty disgusted by golf in general as well. No offense to those of you who golf. I love it. My daughter is now working at a golf club. So, listen, I'm just saying. Let's see. In other news, Chris Christie, the former disgraced New Jersey governor, has announced a run for president. He kicked off his campaign yesterday, and let me just check here. It says nobody cares. Wow. Like nobody, not even his family cares. It's pretty wild that there's almost nobody who thinks that Chris Christie should be running for president or would be a good president or was even a good governor. I mean, anybody in New Jersey knows that because, when he left, he had like a 16% approval rating. But it will be really entertaining and interesting to watch him savage Donald Trump. Let's not forget he was first in line to support Donald Trump when he got thumped in the debates and dropped out at the very beginning of the primaries, I believe. But it's still going to be interesting to watch him criticize Donald Trump, the guy that he once sold his soul to. Here he is doing just that yesterday during his announcement.
The reason this is going to be different this time, sir, is because at least one of us is going to call him on the fact that 8 years ago he stood on the stage in New Hampshire and said he was going to balance the budget in 4 years. And he left with the biggest deficit of any president in American history. He said he was going to eliminate the national debt in 8 years. He added $3 trillion to the national debt in 4 years.
Trump doing or not doing. He also said this about the war in Ukraine.
And now I heard him say, if we made him president again, he would settle the Ukraine war in 24 hours. Did you hear that one? That's a beauty. That's really in a career of complete falsehoods. That makes the top 5. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say Donald Trump could settle it in 24 hours. Let me tell you how he would. He'd give Ukraine to Russia. And he said it. He said it on television. He said it at CNN, and he said, look, Russia's going to wind up with Ukraine anyway, so what's the difference? That's how he'd settle it in 24 hours. He'd call Zelensky and say, hey, guess what? Time to raise the Russian flag up on the pole. We're
out of here, I think is what he was saying. And, of course, this is a big question for every single one of the people who's running for the Republican nomination.
If Donald Trump is indicted and you become president, will you pardon him?
Well, I have to tell you the truth. I can't completely answer that until I know what he was charged with and convicted of. Okay, so, but I'm not going to dodge the answer, okay? But I will tell you as a prosecutor, if I believe someone has gotten a full and fair trial in front of a jury of their peers, and especially someone in public life who committed those crimes when they held a public trust, I can't imagine pardoning them.
Oh, well, I like to hear that, but we'll see. We will see. We shouldn't even be having a campaign that's starting right now, and I don't want to spend too much time covering it, discussing it, or playing clips, but for the entertainment of it. But just always worth mentioning that it's way too long, these campaigns in the United States of America. They capture way too much of our attention. It's definitely about making money, not democracy or the health of democracy, certainly not for Republicans. Other big news, though, yesterday, let's pivot out of that then, is the SAG-AFTRA has announced they are going on strike in solidarity with the Writers Guild. They think they can get better benefits. I should say we, because I'm a member of AFTRA. Here's a message from the SAG-AFTRA National President, Fran Drescher, following strike authorization approval. The nanny.
Hi, SAG-AFTRA members. It's me, Fran Drescher, your National President. I just finished with a wonderful meeting with our negotiating committee, and I just want to thank you all for supporting the strike authorization vote, because tomorrow we are going to enter this negotiation with the AMPTP with a great deal of strength and solidarity and unity that is unprecedented in our union's history. So we march on. We are in it to win it. And it's all because of you.
All right, so just to be clear, actors represented by the Hollywood Union SAG-AFTRA voted to authorize a strike if the major studios, streamers, and production companies don't meet their demands for a new contract by June 30th. So they might not go on strike, but we took a vote to authorize a potential strike on June 30th. So there's that and 3 more stories. Here it is. The headline, Human Rights Campaign declares a national state of emergency for LGBTQ plus people. In the press release yesterday, they said, LGBTQ plus people, Americans, are living in a state of emergency. The multiplying threats facing millions in our community are not just perceived, they are real, tangible, and dangerous. The group's president, Kelly Robinson, said this yesterday. In many cases, they are resulting in violence against LGBTQ Americans, forcing people to uproot their family lives and flee their homes in search of safer states, triggering a tidal wave of increased homophobia and transphobia that puts the safety of each and every one of us at risk. Alongside the emergency declaration, the group will release a digital guidebook, including health and safety resources, a summary of state-by-state laws, know your rights information, and resources designed to support LGBTQ plus travelers and those living in hostile states. For more information on that, go to hrc.org. They are a very important organization. Another story that got a lot of attention yesterday was that a military whistleblower has gone public with claims that the U.S. has a secret UFO retrieval program. He said, we're definitely not alone. Claims that the U.S. recovered spaceships and actual alien bodies and has them hidden away somewhere. But guess what? I don't believe him. Nope. The former intelligence officer's name is David Grush. He led analysis of unexplained anomalous phenomena with the U.S. Department of Defense agency, Who would have more credibility than him? Probably not a lot of people, but that doesn't mean that he's telling the truth. He's alleged that the U.S. has craft of non-human origin and that information on these vehicles being illegally withheld from Congress. He said when he turned over classified information around about the vehicles to Congress, he suffered retaliation from government officials. He left the government in April after a 14-year career in U.S. intelligence, and that's why I say it's bullshit. That's what I'm calling bullshit on. I'll follow up on it, but I wouldn't get too distracted by what seems like it would be an amazing thing because I'm not buying it. I look to Mick West on these things. He's this brilliant writer, investigator, coder who has really done the best work, in my opinion, figuring out UFOs, communicating science, debunking false conspiracy theories. I've had him on the show a long time ago. Maybe I'll reach out to him tomorrow for a "Can I call you real quick" segment, but he's not buying it. And he's got some great tweets about it. He was on News Nation yesterday talking about it. But the main tweet he says is, never mind flying saucers. Whistleblower David Gross says that we have, quote, dead pilots of alien craft. Unfortunately, he's not seen them or any photos of them, the craft, or the technology. But nonetheless, he assures us that it's true. We're going to need some details here. I would definitely check out his Twitter timeline if you're interested in that one, and I will definitely reach out to him as well. And finally, in the news yesterday that I saw in the roundup here, What the Duck is no more with Apple's new iPhone autocorrect update. Yeah, for iPhone users, texting curse words hasn't traditionally been an easy task, with duck being the stand-in for many people's favorite F word. But Apple announced at the Worldwide Developers Conference yesterday that the G-rated autocorrection will come to an end with its newest update. Very exciting. That was quite annoying. Happened to me all the time, so I'm happy to see it. Apple's always been too prude, and it sounds like they're becoming dirty, filthy little birds just like the rest of us. All right, there you go. 17 minutes of news. Too much? Was it too much? Do I do too much? Because I got an hour-long conversation. I really want you to hear all of it, but I know people punch in and out. For those of you who are long haulers or really like to listen to the full show, I think you're going to love this one. Like I said, Eric Anderson isn't famous. He's not some well-known attorney outside of his own spaces that he's worked in, of course, where he's made a great impression. But he's so smart on Twitter, and he used to listen to the old show, and we connected not too long ago. I was just really impressed with his knowledge and humor, and I think you're going to love him. He's an experienced trial lawyer with over 100 jury trials. He defends individuals in misdemeanor and felony proceedings at the state and federal levels. He's also represented individuals and businesses, entities in civil trials. He's also a sin law attorney, he calls himself. That means they defend the rights and assets of those engaged in legal businesses that are sometimes frowned upon by their sinful nature, like beer, whiskey, cigars, adult entertainment, cannabis, and all worthy of protection in his practice. Also involved with the pro wrestling business in different roles since 1983. He's a former roller derby skater, former history and debate teacher, former actor, singer, former Universal Studios tour guide, and you can understand why, because he's so good at this, at talking. Alumni of Boston College School of Law and Long Beach Poly High School out there in California. Go Jackrabbits! Ladies and gentlemen, you can find him online at edalaw.com. It's time to talk to Eric Anderson, who you can also and should follow on Twitter at Eric Anderson Law. And of course, all of that is in the show notes. Let's do it right now for the first time with Eric Anderson and his very squeaky old chair, which I call him out for. And there he is. Look at him. Spiffy. Eric Anderson, thank you very much for joining me. Really cool to connect with you on Twitter and then talk with you and have you on the show. It's a real honor to have you in my space, virtual space. Thank you.
Well, the honor is really mine, Pete. I've been a fan of yours since I first caught you when I got SiriusXM. I heard you on the POTUS channel. Loved it every morning, was listening to it all the time. It was so different with this perspective because it wasn't a pundit. It was someone, and you always had a very good, diverse set of guests and great information. That's where I first saw John Fugelsang. There were some of the others who were coming in that were great. And from there, followed you around a bit as you popped from channel to channel. So for me, I can't believe I'm actually on here.
Yeah, it is. It's a huge honor for you. That's right. Thank you for straightening me out, Eric. Well done. So we got a lot to talk about, and I'm really happy to have you and your expertise and your whole career's worth of wisdom here for folks to learn from. But real quick, you and I are always going back and forth on Twitter, and which is working still for me, at least to see your tweets and responses. But something yesterday, Cornel West, the former Harvard professor and now Princeton emeritus professor, announced that he was running for president. And you have a nuanced take on that. So I wanted to hear from you. You're a no? Are you a no on Cornel West?
Well, yeah, but I think as you said, we need to break down as to why.
Right.
Because I have a tremendous amount of respect for Dr. West. I remember meeting him back in the 90s when I lived in New York, and he showed up he was invited to speak at the school I worked at. And just always impressive, smart man, very caring man, wants to make the world a better place. There's no question or doubt about it. For me, number one is I'm not a fan of ever voting for people who want to be president who've never held a political office. It just aren't. And I'm sure that a part of what he's doing is to try and get these issues out there that are very near and dear to his heart for people to hear. My concern becomes the longer it goes, the more concerned I am that for those who are in his camp, which definitely would be people on, progressives, further left progressive. If we did not have an electoral college system, I wouldn't worry about it. But because we do, in places where those little votes can make a difference, Pennsylvania, I think Florida's a lost cause to begin with, so I'm not going to put the blame on them there. But Pennsylvania, maybe Nevada, maybe Arizona, maybe Georgia, maybe North Carolina, then I worry about it when it goes too long. Because if you start to pull, because that's the first thing. This first place of attack is going to be the Democrats are not progressive enough. And you got to think strategically, because in 2016, too many people didn't think strategically. And we've been paying for it ever since.
It feels like black folks thought very strategically in 2020, specifically in South Carolina, where Joe Biden really took over and got the nod. And I wonder what your theory is on black folks really, I think, arguably being the reason that Joe Biden first got the nomination, and then you could argue won the election, certainly in a state like Georgia and Pennsylvania, in Michigan. What are your thoughts on the support that he got from so many black people, which, again, seemed like a pragmatic approach, not necessarily the favorite candidate, but it seemed like, well, this is the candidate that can beat the guy who is not really good for us?
Yeah, I'm going to say something that might bother a lot of people, because obviously I don't speak for every black person, but I know a few. First of all, if there's one thing we know well, that we have always known well, our parents knew well, our grandparents knew well, our great-grandparents knew well, we know white people. We do. We know them far better than they know us or anybody else.
For sure.
We know exactly what their thinking is going to be and what they're going to go. I recall
you literally texted me when I was eating breakfast this morning and said, "Really, oatmeal with bananas?" I was like, "How does this guy know?"
That's right. No brown sugar at all? None? I mean, really? Do you put sugar on your grits too? I mean, what the hell?
Oh, let's go off on that tangent as long as you want.
That's right.
So, I love it. By the way, loudest chair I've ever heard. Is that chair worth something? Was that the actual chair from a university? It looks like a very sophisticated chair. It's making the loud creaking noise every time you move.
I am so sorry. Part of this is because I'm such a heavy man. But it's just true. I'm such a heavy man. But no, this chair actually belonged to my father-in-law. So I've had it since.
It means something.
Still alive.
Well, knowing its story and its burden hosting you, I will leave it alone. You were starting to say something really interesting when I went off about, black folks know white people a lot better than white folks know black folks and themselves, arguably. And so go ahead.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that was known was very clearly was that, one, you were going to need a candidate who was going to have to appeal to those white voters, because you're not going to get the majority of them. You already know this. No Democrat has got a majority of the white vote since, I think, Jimmy Carter. So you know that. So the question is, what can you peel off? What can you get to go with you? Can you get enough? I think I may have first heard it on one of your shows, but I've heard it repeatedly ever since. John McCain and George H.W. Bush got the same percentage of the white vote in their respective elections. It was enough for George H.W. Bush to win. Wasn't even close to enough for John McCain because the demographics changed. So when you realize you have a close vote coming up and you know that the candidate now is Donald Trump, and you know exactly who he is appealing to. And even people, we came across so many people who said, well, I don't agree with all of this with him, but I love his policies, so I'm going to go with his policies. And you knew you needed people who were like, I like some of his policies, but not enough to vote for him. For that, you needed people who needed that safe space. And after, because yes, I know they hate to say it, but really, nobody loves safe spaces more than conservatives. But really, just like no one's a bigger snowflake than conservatives. They just are. But these are people who freaked out when there were stores that didn't exploit their Messiah's birthday enough. They don't say Merry Christmas, and these people freaked out. And I'm like, all they want to do is take your money, and you're freaking out because they're not exploiting your religion. But I digress.
Oh, that's a good digression, sir.
Yeah, so of course we thought strategically, because I think as well, one of the privileges that I think happens a lot, particularly with white progressives, is they don't necessarily have to suffer the consequences of not thinking strategically.
Right.
So in 2016, I recall, a friend of mine, his brother-in-law, I remember this conversation, greatly, and out on online repeatedly, kept emphasizing why he couldn't vote for Hillary Clinton. And one of the things I kept bringing up was the issue is the courts. The courts is the big issue.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, no. And he says, nobody cares about the courts. People are trying to get health care. People are trying to get food. Man, I said, yes. I said, but here's the thing you forget. Democrats may not give you everything you want. Republicans will take away everything that you currently have that you love. It's just that simple. And sure enough, as we expected, once they had control of the Senate and they had control of the nomination process, what happened? Suddenly that was they'd taken for granted. Progressives had taken for granted. White progressives had taken for granted. Because black progressives never take those things for granted. Just like certain other groups out there that are always not taking certain things for granted because they know it's happened before, it can happen again here.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. So well said, Eric. I couldn't agree more, but it's always a good reminder. So, I mean, you're talking about a lot of things changing and happening and things being taken from us, including the first black president gets the opportunity to make a nomination when Scalia dies. And because of what you said, Mitch McConnell running the Senate and the nomination process, Merrick Garland never even gets a hearing, and it's a holdover. And then Trump gets to make the nomination, right?
Yeah. And then later on, when Ginsburg dies, and I remember I was on a plane coming back from Chicago. I landed. I turned on my phone. I saw that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had died. My first thought immediately was, "Oh, can I speak freely here?"
Of course you can, sir.
Yeah. My first thought was, "Oh shit, Roe is dead." And I knew it. I knew that Barrett was going to be rammed down our throats. I knew it. I knew why she was going to be rammed down our throats. I knew exactly what was going to happen with it. They had the numbers. They were going to use it. Yep. One thing you have to give the Republicans a lot of credit for always is they know how to use power. Once they have it, they know how to use it.
Yeah.
Except for those times when they're fighting amongst themselves.
I do think there's a double standard with it. I do think that
there is.
I do think that Democrats know how to use power, but they can't necessarily, meaning, for example, they definitely wanted to use power to do all kinds of things, but they couldn't because there were two Democrats that refused to allow them. And that's true in Obama when you had centrists like, what's her name? Well, there's a few, more than that. Blanche Lincoln. And now with Biden, you've got Lieberman stopped so much of what Obama did. He prevented the public option in healthcare, which would have competed with would have been amazing. Joe Lieberman, the Democrat, turned independent, of course. And now, of course, as you're saying, I'm talking about Manchin and Sinema. My point being, Democrats can't do what Republicans can do because they literally don't have the numbers. Or someone might argue, Pete, you're apologizing for them. And the point is, Joe Biden couldn't do anything to get Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema to turn their vote. And he tried. And eventually he did to Joe Manchin. The point being, it's I don't know. If you have 98% of Democrats that want to do something and 2 Democrats who don't, it's hard to blame the Democrats. Long way.
It is. And one of the other difficulties, though, there's that old expression, and I'm sure you know it. What is it? Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. There were very few Republicans who were for Donald Trump until it was clear that he was going to get the nomination. And then one by one, Ted Cruz buckled like a bitch. It was just amazing to see. Marco Rubio, same thing, though. Again, you can't expect a great deal of spine from Marco Rubio. It's just not who he is. I thought Cruz had a chance to be that. The only one I recall really staying, the course would have been Kasich. I don't think Kasich ever buckled. I think Kasich stayed all the way through, never turned around and endorsed him, never went to kiss his honey. And that's normal, in part because so much of the Republican Party wants the same thing. So much of the Democratic Party does not.
Yeah, I mean, don't you think that's as a product of the diversity within each party in terms of ethnicity, in terms of thought? I mean, overwhelmingly in terms of, I would argue the biggest difference, and you've said it plainly twice, two different ways. I'll say it a little less eloquently, is the idea of how we see what government's role and purpose should be in our life, not the size of it, but literally the role and purpose of local, state, and of course the federal government. We see it so differently in how it should be used, and even tax policy. So I just feel like it's such a different way of thinking about government.
It is completely. It's just very strange sometimes to watch this battle, because it's not as if I used to hear this all the time and before anybody says he's this raging liberal, I want to remind people. The very first person I ever voted for president was George Herbert Walker Bush. It's the first person I ever voted for president. And all my reasons were very simple. He was a former vice president, he was a former congressman. He had the experience. I preferred that to Cox. That's the first one I voted for. The next person I voted for was Bill Clinton. And I did that twice. The next person I voted for was Al Gore for almost the same reason I voted for George H.W. Bush. Because he had experience, former U.S. senator. The next person I voted for, and I know I'm going to get eviscerated for this by some folks, was the second term of George W. Bush, because I was waiting for John Kerry to tell me what he would do differently in this war in Iraq, and I never got an answer. So I stuck with the guy who led me. After that, I haven't had a reason to vote for a Republican since because of the culture wars. I voted for Mitt Romney as governor of Massachusetts. So I've been very open-minded as to where I go, but I just see now one party that is completely discombobulated, but is trying to find a way to make life better. And another one just comes across so mean-spirited and accepting of something that's deceitful left and right. I mean, how many times have Democrats over the last few years kicked out members of their party out of legislative bodies because they did something that was deceitful or questionable conduct? I mean, they've done it. Whereas we're seeing often with the GOP, they're not.
Yeah, well, that's the least of it.
That would not have happened with the GOP in the 80s.
No. I think Newt Gingrich really changed a lot in 1994 with the Republican Party, making it that much worse when it comes to those types of things, arguably. Yeah. Let me ask you, in terms of your expertise, you've done it all. As a lawyer, you've been on both sides or at both tables. You've been a defender, a prosecutor. You've worked in the private sector. You've worked for the government, right?
Yep.
Tell us like your quick resume, your jobs.
Well, let's see. I started off as an assistant district attorney out in Middlesex, Massachusetts. I did that for about 5 years. Then I went to the Shasta County DA's office in Shasta County, California, which is far northern California. In fact, here's a tidbit for you. You are looking at the very first African-American deputy district attorney in the history of Shasta County. And that was in 2006.
Wow.
And from everyone else I spoke to, as far as they knew, I was the first Black attorney based in Shasta County. And that was in 2006. Like literally when I came in, the census number changed. I mean, it was so. And that was a huge culture shock, because I used to think that I was conservative until I moved there. They were just left of Attila the Hun. Strange.
Why would you?
They're in the news.
The politics in that part of California, you're saying, were very left. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, God, no. No, Shasta was very right-wing.
You said they were left of Attila the Hun. Got it.
Yes. They're just left of Attila the Hun.
I wasn't sure where he sat on the Overton window. Forgive me.
Yeah.
So why would you do that? Why would you, a black man, move to a predominantly white and conservative place to go work in the DA's office?
Well, first of all, I know what it's like to be the only one in the place. That's been most of my life history. I've often been the only one in a measure. And I think that most black professionals will tell you that that's been their experience too. They either one of one or one of few. So that part wasn't new to me. Even in Middlesex, when I was there were only, I think, my year when I started were 2 black attorneys, one in appellate. And I think there was one that came in the year I left. So it wasn't that diverse to begin with, either there. In Shasta, one of the things that was appealing was, first of all, Dan Flynn, who was the assistant district attorney, did the greatest recruiting job I've ever had in my entire life. Just fantastic. I mean, he really showed this is a place where you can have opportunity to do what you love to do. They were very, very much adamant that they wanted trial lawyers. And that was one of the changes when I got there too. I noticed that there weren't a lot of people at that office who were trying cases. There were like 3 or 4 DAs who were really doing it, and the rest weren't. Me, I always said I went to law school to try cases. So whenever anybody said, "I'll see you in court," I'm like, how in the world is that a threat to me? What I like to do is, that's what I went to law school for. I don't know what you went to. I didn't do it to write 30-page, memos. So that was appealing. The other thing was a good friend of mine. We were talking, and he said, "Well, Eric," because I also had other offers in other places. And he said, "Eric, how much of the big city lifestyle do you live?" And I said, "Well, I don't go out to dinner every night. I don't do this and that." He said, "Well, then why pay for it?" So I said, "Sure, I'll go try it for, a year or 2. I'll go out to Shasta and give it a whirl," because the difference was, and in Middlesex, we weren't paid well at all. We just weren't. Shasta, when I got there, not only had Dan and Jerry Benito, who was the DA at the time, done a very great job of hiring me at the right time to get more money, but the cost of living in Shasta was so different that it was the equivalent of tripling my salary.
Wow. Well, that makes it. So I scratch my question. The point is, I've been the only black person or one of a few in many places. So if you're going to pay me 3 times as much to do that in this new place, send me a ticket. Let's go. What have you seen in all these places that you think is so broken? We talked a lot about that off the air, about what you'd seen that are so many issues. And part of the reason why you went from one job to another is because you realized what was wrong and you were hoping maybe to fix it over here. Give me some thoughts on that.
Yeah, let me be clear. I've got no hope of fixing, because it's one person, and you need such a massive movement to fix so many things. And we as a society just don't have the guts to do it, because the minute someone tries, we start screaming. You hear this all the time now about these, my God, these progressive DAs, these woke DAs, they're making everything worse. People are running out, stealing and robbing and doing all this. As if that doesn't happen anyway, all the time. When people complain, well, they're letting people out of prison, and you have to remind people, you were told years ago, this is to the state of California, you were told years ago, you have an overcrowding problem. You need to fix it. The state of California did almost nothing to fix it. So at some point, they had to change laws to get people out faster, because it was a constitutional violation. Right. Why was it so crowded? The war on drugs and 3 strikes. Yeah.
3 strikes policy was passed. It was destruction. Yeah. You could, Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow, I'll never forget the chapter about that, where, a guy's 3 strikes were like the first 2 were like he stole a pair of socks, and, it was such petty stuff. And then he got this ridiculous sentence for the most petty of crimes. And why would I want to pay my taxpayer money to give that guy shelter, food, and health care because he stole an apple and a pair of socks for 25 years? Like, how is that? Yeah. How is that benefiting any part of society, much less, the taxes that I'm paying? It's so inefficient and so punitive. But that was right. Cruelty was the point, I guess.
It kind of was, because it's easy to sell. Yeah. For one, most people never think the criminal justice system is going to involve them. Sure. And I've always noticed this about people. Number one is, when they or someone they love is the alleged victim of a crime, they have no concern whatsoever regarding the rights of the accused. Don't care, don't want to hear about it, none whatsoever. They're amazed at the idea that they have to be questioned. Right? What do you mean he has to testify in court? It's one thing that's always bothered me with the whole idea. Well, they're going to be victimized again on the stand. That's how this works, folks. I'm sorry. That's no matter what the charge is. That's how it works. There's a right to question your accuser, period. If you don't like that particular system, I assure you, you're not going to like the alternative any better. It's going to be far worse.
Right.
But I've also noticed that when people, they or their loved ones are the accused, suddenly they care all about it. Suddenly they want to know, suddenly they want every last right they can possibly get, every single time. And that is, one could argue it's a human condition to be selfish.
Sure.
It's I find it a lot here in the States, in part because, despite some of the rhetoric, Americans we praise selfishness. We seek selfishness. We promote selfishness. It's the I got mine, you get yours.
Yep.
And so you can't be surprised when that then turns around and applies to rights. So that was something that needed to be changed. I have a huge problem with the whole bail structure. Bail is supposed to ensure the return of the defendant. It's supposed to, and for some people, frankly, $500 bail might as well be $50,000.
Right.
And so the idea that you will stay in jail until your case is resolved based upon how much money you have or how many resources you have it borders on pornographic. And I don't mean that in the positive sense of the term.
No, it's obscene. It's punitive in such a way that, I'm trying to think of any kind of better word for it, but it's just so absurd. And I'm not sure about how bail works in Finland or Israel or Japan, but I mean,
in some countries, personal recognizance is presumed.
Yeah, you're going to return. You committed a crime. You're going to return to your hearing, or there's going to be a big
And when you think about it, it also makes sense because let me see if I get this straight. We trust you to be out and about in the world and that you will show up on time because you gave us money.
I'm sorry for laughing, but I've never, ever heard it put that way. Yes.
And now, because of bail bondsmen, you didn't even give us the money we asked for. We asked for $50,000. You gave $5,000 to somebody else, right? And that somebody else is the one who put up the real $50,000, the bond, for you. So we trust you for that regard. And then we have this ridiculous process that brings people back to court over and over again for useless hearings and useless scheduling. And the problem is, and I learned this when I was in Shasta, I never thought about it. This is where my little privilege comes in. I'd always been, for the most part, a salaried employee somewhere. When I was in Shasta, so many people were hourly wage workers, or they were agricultural workers. And so every time you were bringing them into court, they were losing money, or they were losing, the chance to work their farm, their area. And that just becomes, when someone has come back for the fourth or fifth continuance, and they're there for what's going to be a 5-minute appearance, but they're stuck there for 3 or 4 hours. That's just not a good system. There's got to be a better way of doing it. I think with technology, we can do it. If we know there's going to be a continuance, how about the DA and the defense attorney are able to communicate online and submit to the court a request for a continuation based upon this basis? And if the court grants it, great, you don't need to show up. If the court says, nah, this time you guys need to come in, great, then we come in. But that makes too much sense. And one of the problems, of course, here is here in California, we have 58 counties. That's 58 different fiefdoms. So we've got 58 different scheduling systems. Unlike the federal system where I can go in and I can see everything, everywhere in every other place, I can't do that here. I got to have 58 different passwords, and it's ridiculous. So it's not very efficient. It's not very helpful in that regard. And as I said, one thing I like about Massachusetts had if you thought someone was dangerous, you could do what's called a 58A. That's a dangerousness hearing. And if I'm going on too long, let me know.
Not at all. I was going to ask you for some specific examples. So.
Yeah, the 58A is a hearing in which, at least when I was still actively there, I have no reason to think it's changed. 58A was where you had a hearing to be able to hold somebody without bail for up to 60 days. And at the end of 60 days, the Commonwealth had to reapply. And this you would use for horribly violent, incidents, crimes, people beaten so badly you're amazed that they're alive. Obviously, rape would be one, a variety of other reasons, the 58A hearing. And so now dangerousness was a standard you could use to determine, and again, the standard was lower than at a trial. It was a preponderance of the evidence as opposed to beyond reasonable doubt. That's always fine. But here in Cal, we will have things where based upon these charges, these charges are so terrible that we're going to go ahead and have this high amount of bail on these charges. You haven't met a dangerousness standard. You haven't shown a prima facie case for a dangerousness standard. So why in the world do we need to have this incredibly large bail for all of these people? And I know some people say, well, this will keep them from committing crimes when they're out. That's the difference with the 58A hearing. We were able to establish that there's a reason for public safety.
Right.
With the bail system that we have in Cal, the charge alone is enough for a court to say, well, I'm really concerned about that.
Is that in every county out there?
That's throughout the state. Now, again, how each judge uses it will vary from place to place.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Give me another example of some injustice that you experienced through either yourself as a lawyer, more likely a client of yours, that, illustrates a problem in the criminal justice system that you saw. Did you have, do you have many examples of that?
Way too many examples.
Yeah. Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, without naming them, there's a county out here that is notorious for overly high initial offers. And that is where the first thing out of their mouth is, your client's got to go to prison. And I've had numerous cases in which they say, your client's going to prison. And then by the end of the day, my client's got probation or an infraction. And in one case, I recall they were advocating for a prison sentence. It involved a gun case. And whenever it's a gun case, prison is almost always on the table. I get that. So I'm not sure about that. And I want to be clear, too. I don't knock DAs for doing their job. And sometimes when their offers aren't all that great, I also remind myself what I used to say when I was a DA and a defense attorney had a problem with my offer. I'd say, look, nobody voted for me. I don't get to set policy.
Right. I hear
Somebody
you.
else sets the policy.
Right. I hear you. Yeah. Same could be said for judges at some points too, right? In terms of sentencing or other discretionary.
Yeah, the difficulty for judges here, it's one reason why I'm not a fan of elected judges. Have not been a fan. And part of that may be because I started my career in Massachusetts where we don't have them.
Right.
Because I think that the problem with elected judges is, if you want to see a sad sight, it's watching someone who cares about the law and being a judge trying to campaign. They clearly hate it.
Yeah, no, I have. I've seen that like this week in my town where I'm trying to help Democrats get elected.
Yeah, they clearly hate it. And the idea of the public, I'm going to be frank. I don't care if I'm hurting people's feelings with this, but the general public isn't even remotely competent to determine who is and is not a good judge.
I think that's fair. What percent? How would you even know?
Every lawyer will tell you when it's election season, they get calls from their friends as to who they should vote for judge. Because they don't know. They don't know.
Sure.
And the other problem is that then all it takes is one case that gets the right kind of publicity, or I should say the wrong kind of publicity. Right. And next thing you know, very competent judges, respected by both sides of the aisle, are then out of jobs because the public is not voting them, which then becomes the lesson for other judges is what? Show no mercy. Right,
meaning you sentence somebody to 10 years, and when they got out, there was some form of recidivism. They did something, and then the campaign ad made is, this judge only sentences criminal for 10 years. When he got out, he murdered a lady, and it's that judge's fault. That kind of a thing, you mean, like sentencing stuff? They're too soft on crime, and so look what happens.
Yes, forgetting that, A, it's a very difficult job, and B, these judges, they get sentencing recommendations from probation that has looked deeply into the history and the facts of this case, as well as the arguments of the prosecution and the arguments of the defense. I mean, even 99% of the judges I've dealt with, even the ones I disagree with adamantly almost every time, are all very serious about the job they're trying to do. Very serious about it. I've only come across a couple of judges who I would look at and say that person is absolutely terrible and isn't even trying.
Getting back to what you were saying about when I said for the specific example of injustice, you talked about the initial offers from the DA of prison and pick up there. I mean, what happens then?
Well, after you get the initial offer, the next thing you're going to do, obviously, is you work the case. Here in California, your first step on a felony case, your first thing you're going to do is a preliminary hearing. And a preliminary hearing is a probable cause hearing. It's a hearing to determine whether or not the state has enough to proceed with their case. It has a lower burden of proof. It's preponderance of the evidence as opposed to beyond reasonable doubt. The phrase often is fit more likely than not, is kind of it. And I love preliminary hearings because it's a chance to see what the evidence is, chance to test. Sometimes you're able to get charges reduced. Sometimes you're able to get some charges dismissed. And then after that, now we start gearing up towards trial. So there's always these two phases to it, kind of. I learned as well as a prosecutor, and I see this as a defense attorney too. For the most part, the prosecution's case is never as strong as it is on the day of arraignment because no one's questioning anything yet. No one's questioning anything. Nothing's been really investigated. I mean, you have some investigation, but remember, in many cases, the police, when they're getting ready for their arrest, are doing, do I have enough for a prima facie case? They're not looking for what's exculpatory, what is working against the evidence I have. The better cops are the ones who do. And those are the ones that, from a defense perspective, those are the ones that are hard to deal with.
Well, we haven't talked yet about law enforcement, the first line, because when we talk about criminal justice, I think we're talking about cops, law enforcement of all sorts, of all types. Then we're talking about the courts, and then I think we're talking about the prison system and anything else. There's a lot more, but I like to think of it that way. The first interaction is with law enforcement. And so that's obviously one of the primary issues. There's a lot to say about that. How do you think about criminal justice reform when it comes to law enforcement, seeing as that there's 17,000 different, jurisdictions, 8 law enforcement agencies? There's a lot to say. I don't know, but I still think we can generalize in some ways. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think you can, but it depends on, as I said, when I was living in Long Beach, for a lot of my teen years, I to this day do not trust the Long Beach Police Department. I don't trust them one iota. I don't trust any report they write. I don't trust anything they say.
Wow.
Because my experiences as a younger person there, I mean, why do you need to frisk me for jaywalking?
Maybe were you a cute boy?
Well, had he done a little pinch, I would have, I at least would have seen it.
Now that would have been fine if he finished me off, but otherwise I feel violent.
I mean, show me this is friendly, but that wasn't it. The eagerness to pull a gun on somebody in their face.
Did you have a gun pulled on you by a cop?
Oh God, yeah, we've all had that. Everybody in the neighborhood I grew up with had that.
Oh man,
almost everybody.
Wow.
And I admit that that's my bias about them. Now, conversely, when I was in Massachusetts, and as much as people talk about, it's so racist, et cetera, and God knows it can be, but I had experiences with both cops who I knew I could trust and cops who were a little shaky. Like, for example, asking an officer, did you see him throw the packet of drugs? And you could have one cop who might say, do you need me to see that? And you might have another cop who says, I can't testify to that. Well, the second one is the cop who I know I can always trust. Because it'd be very easy for him to say, yeah, saw him throw it. But he says, I can't testify. Well, so I know whenever I get a report from this cop, I know it's pretty good, it's pretty solid, because he doesn't have to. That first one, I'm going to have a problem with that. A huge problem. I've also seen officers who have different attitudes about people who, as they say, get off. I've seen some officers who will say, well, either he'll stop doing it or we'll get him next time. Because really, with the law of averages, if you are a repeat offender, you are going to get caught at some point.
Right.
Just because most of the repeat offenders aren't really professional about what they do. They you get different kind of offenders, but the largest group is what I like to call the perpetual fuck-ups. Just perpetual fuck-ups. Just will not take the time to do the job right. You have those who don't play well with others. Those wind up in prison. You have the truly evil is a really small group. Everybody else is pretty much the perpetual fuck-up, or they don't play well with others, or the other one is they're not very good at their jobs. You can't be a good thief because we caught you 15 times.
Right.
Try something else. As opposed to the thief who no one knows is a thief. We used to say all the time in the DA's office, it's still true. We don't catch the smart ones. We don't even know about the smart ones. We catch the dumb ones.
You mentioned when talking about criminal justice reform, talking about law enforcement, you mentioned, drugs, chasing somebody because he's got drugs. First of all, I think cops chasing people is almost always a bad idea because somebody innocent is going to get hurt way too often. That's a big problem. And why are you chasing them? But put that aside, drugs.
Yes.
have destroyed a generation of Americans, specifically Black Americans in cities across the country. Destroyed neighborhoods in ways because, the black market's pretty good business, but it comes with violence and obviously addiction. But more importantly, they were sentenced to horrible, inhumane, primitive, evil, inefficient, unhelpful, destroying of families sentences for possessing and using drugs, even for dealing small amounts of drugs, much less big amounts of drugs. I mean, we don't talk about it as much anymore, I feel, but we should, because the idea, and part of that is marijuana legalization, part of that is, the crack cocaine disparities, but still people are going to jail and still people are making big money selling drugs. It's never going to change. Americans are always going to want their drugs. What are your thoughts on what the drug war has created, done, and what can, if anything, can be done about it?
Yeah, the drug war should just be renamed the Law Enforcement Employment Act. I mean, it just should be, because that's really what's come with it. It's a whole truckload of money that comes into different places via grants, via block distribution, to hire more cops, to pay more overtime for a variety of other issues. You mentioned a variety of things. Like, for example, why were they chasing? Well, they had quotas. They got arrest quotas. They had arrest stats. As I would tell people, The Wire is more a documentary than it is a fictional TV program. And of course, David Simon would blatantly say that that's exactly kind of right. Because there was the idea and the pressure to get these numbers in a particular way. And it was easy to find. I used to say this all the time growing up in Long Beach. You could go into central Long Beach and you could see, and grab all the drugs you wanted, but where else you could have found it? Belmont Shore. But they weren't going to raid a home in Belmont Shore.
That's more affluent.
That's a more affluent area. Yeah. Bixby Knolls, they weren't going to raid a home in Bixby Knolls. They weren't. I mean, I could sit there and I could tell you people who I knew back in high school, who I played football. Some of them would use drugs, some didn't. But then I also look at a few other kids who I knew, who I went to school with, because our school was pretty diverse, in part because of the magnet programs that were there. And I know a variety of them, which I could say, you could have stopped them at any point, and you would have found pot. You could have stopped that person at any point. On a Saturday, you could have found that person with, cocaine. But they did, they had the complexion protection, so they weren't the ones who were getting grabbed.
Complexion protection. 47 years in a row. Thank you, sir. Today's show is brought to you by Complexion Protection. Boy, does it feel good to be born white in America. Unless you're one of the...
I'll credit Paul Mooney for that.
Is that right? Yeah. One of the majority, unless you're one of the majority of the whites who believe that white is actually more discriminated against than black. Continue on the drug, anything you want else to say about it.
Yes. So the other thing is that there's never been a benefit to it, at all. And one of the great cruelties of it, there's this wonderful secret recording, no longer secret, it's now been released, of Nixon. Nixon in the White House talking about the drug issues, and Nixon himself saying, so this is really a health issue. It's not really a crime issue. And one of his advisors to say, yeah, you're right. That's exactly what it is. But of course, Nixon couldn't do that. He couldn't come out and tell America, look, we need to treat this like an addiction process. But guess when we decided to treat it like an addiction process? Hello, fentanyl, and hello.
Yeah.
Exactly. Hello, white people on drugs who aren't all from trailer parks.
And you see white... It is
white people on drugs in trailer parks. Yeah, we don't care about them.
No, because for sure it's a class issue, no doubt about it. The vast majority of white folks in jail for drugs come from places where they don't have as much resources. Let's be clear. But the point of what you're saying, it's like that movie Traffic, and depicts that. The DA or I think the AG's daughter is an addict, and he goes all over the place to find her and save her.
Yeah, the drug czars. Yeah, Michael Douglas. I think it was
drug czar. Yeah. That's a great movie. Go ahead. What else would you say about anything else that you want to?
Well, yeah. Look, we've never gotten anything out. Nothing good has come from this particular fight, and now we're seeing this slow movement towards legalization that needs to stop being slow and just get on board. Like when I see a state, whenever I see one of those Confederate states that says we're going to legalize medicinal cannabis. Well, anybody with the good sense God gave a peanut can get a medicinal card to get cannabis once it gets there. So you're about to legalize it. You just don't want to admit it yet. And how many members of Congress have we seen who don't vote to legalize, but the minute they get out, suddenly are talking about legalizing a variety of drugs?
You know who the most famous of that is? John Boehner. John Boehner refused to, I think, even take it up for a vote or even talk about it. He's always against it. And then I think the first big gig he got was a cannabis company.
Yeah. I mean, when did Mitch McConnell start looking at cannabis differently? When it turned out that Kentucky can grow cannabis.
Right. Yep.
So I think that needs to just now. What we're going to do with the hard drugs is much more complex. But at the very least, at the federal level, because the states have clearly decided, it's funny, the states have clearly overwhelmingly decided we don't have a problem with cannabis. At the federal level, we need to reschedule it. It should not be.
No doubt about it. Long overdue.
Long overdue.
I feel like we've seen some positive change in our lifetimes and in your career, but you don't sound that optimistic about maybe even the change we've seen, much less the change you hope to come.
Well, I think part of it is because we're seeing such a giant regression. When my generation came about, I mean, to put this in perspective, I'm the first person in my family born when America had made de jure illegal racial discrimination illegal. And I'm 53. It's not that long ago.
Right.
It really isn't. All my older cousins, my sisters, none of them grew up in America, were born in America that had that. None. So it's still fresh. But I think where you start to get depressed, to an extent, is, as I said, we were fine as a country. As a country, we were fine for the most part with slavery from, and I'm not going to count the colonial years, we were fine with slavery being allowed in this country for a good, 80 years. Then at the end of that decided, okay, well, we're going to get rid of the slavery, but we're going to keep the white supremacy. And we were fine with that, as a whole. Even people who weren't wearing robes, who weren't burning crosses, they all knew what was going on and they were fine with it. They did nothing about it. We go through that for another, century. We get affirmative action, and inside of 10 years, the Bakke decision, white people lost their minds. Wait, it's racism against us now. Wait a minute. Okay, so
which decision?
It's a problem. Bakke versus the regents of the University of California. This was the first affirmative action case. And actually, it didn't even take 10 years for there to be a lawsuit to get there. And it was one that did rule that race could be considered. And again, there are a variety of ways you can do diversity without having to come up with a quota idea. And certainly you can have goals without a hard quota. Because sometimes, we only make up 12% of the American population. There's only so much of us to go around.
The Bakke case, Bakke, 35-year-old white man had twice applied for admission to University of California Medical School at Davis. He was rejected both times. School reversed 16 places in each entering class of 100 for qualified minorities as part of the university's affirmative action program in an effort to redress longstanding unfair minority exclusions from the medical profession. And Bakke's qualifications exceeded those of any of the minority students admitted to 2 years of his applications were rejected. Bakke first contended first in the California courts, then in the Supreme Court, that he was excluded from admission solely on the basis of his race, that he was white. Is that it?
Yeah, that's pretty much it, which I found funny because, if you look at the class pictures over there at the medical school at the time, plenty of white people there.
My joke about affirmative action is my father-in-law, who's not really part of the picture, worked at the assembly line at an unnamed car company. And he always complained, in the few times I met him, about when he would complain about black folks, he would always talk about affirmative action is the reason they promoted the black guy over him because of affirmative action. And he wasn't better than him. And I was like, well, listen, let me even bend over backwards to concede that maybe he wasn't better than you. did it ever occur to you that you're the worst of the whites? They had to pick one guy, Mario.
But that brings up a very good point, because one of the things that we often deal with when this discussion takes place is what people aren't saying out loud, but they're implying is that only white people are qualified because they chose this minority over, I'd rather someone like, for example, when, Justice Jackson Brown was appointed. I mean, her credentials are outstanding.
You just did it to her. You just called her Jackson Brown.
Instead of Brown. Yeah, that's right. I did.
Ketanji, go ahead. No, but her qualifications.
Yeah, were
Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Certainly far superior to Amy Coney, to Barrett.
Arguably to anybody.
Yeah. Frankly, yes. I mean, here's the thing.
Her judicial experience, my understanding alone, she had much more judicial experience. Absolutely, I think.
Yeah, I didn't want Gorsuch on the bench, but I couldn't say that Gorsuch wasn't qualified.
Right, fair, yeah.
No, I couldn't. It would be impossible to say. I couldn't say that Roberts wasn't qualified. He was. That's the other issue too. When people talk about qualified, it's like, well, wait, what does qualified mean? There's a large section. We have so many judges who would all be good on the.
No, I hear you. I mean, I'm surprised there's not more talk about the fact that Samuel Alito, his last job before Supreme Court he was a service manager at a Honda dealership, but I'm surprised. I'm sure he was qualified. He's just such a terrible person.
Yes, he was qualified.
And I was thinking of the most recent terrible person I know.
But again, their number one qualification, of course, is they are exactly what the Federal Society wants.
Right.
And you had a president who really didn't care about making judicial picks, was perfectly happy to bend over I won't say bend over, was really happy to go along with whatever the Federal Society wants.
No doubt.
And so that is, when we're talking qualifications, that's where I get slightly annoyed, because when it's someone of color or it's, a woman in some instances, then they'll scream about the qualification issue, all the while ignoring that so many other people are there because their primary qualification is they're white and they have this philosophy.
That's so well said. All right, let's see. White? Yeah. All right. Do you believe that the 14th Amendment, like they go down and it's always this right wing, Constitution is dead. It is what it is. It's originalism. Are you an originalist, basically? Are you white and actually, what's better than a white originalist?
Oh, yes. Here it comes. That's what I often say. A staunch conservative's favorite black people are black people who don't like black people. They love those guys and gals. They love their candidates.
Speaking of Tim Scott, what do you think of his candidacy?
Well, again, here I think is the problem for almost everybody on the Republican side. And again, I'm somebody who I like to see qualified candidates, good candidates on both sides, so that even if the person who I want to win doesn't win, I'm able to sleep at night. We'll be okay. We're in fairly good hands. We'll be all right. The problem that they all are going to have is, if Donald Trump is in the race, what are you offering that's different than Donald Trump?
Right.
And his core, that third of the party, for some godforsaken reason, that will never, ever leave him, no matter what happens. Why would they turn to you? And for the others that aren't diehard Donald Trump, you're back again to it. How many of them are going to go and coalesce around you? You spent 4 years, kissing his ass. What are you going to do different?
Right.
And if you're somebody who wants Trump, why would you settle for Trump light?
Right.
So I think Scott has a problem. I think Haley's got a problem. I think, you're differentiating yourself from him now, but but where were you before him? Christie, I think, is going to have a problem. For the same kind of thing. Because the warnings about Donald Trump were all there. To me, it's anybody who stood up there and said, of all the choices in 2016 of the Republican Party you could choose from, that the absolute best choice of them all, the person you were most willing to put in the most powerful position in the world, was Donald J. Trump. I mean, I'm sorry. The time to make your argument, Christie, was 2016. Yeah. But he folded like a cheap suit, too.
Yeah, he certainly did. And by the way, when he left New Jersey, he was under such a black cloud of corruption with the bridge closing and so much more. I mean, he had an approval rating of like 16% from New Jersey.
Oh, yeah. Well, Pence is going to have the same problem.
Oh, well, yeah.
It was Trump who saved him in because he wasn't going to get reelected.
No, it's a good Pence and Christie are definitely in the lane of, what are you doing? Nobody likes you. Like, nobody.
Yes. Yeah, it was like Bobby Jindal in 2016. Like, what in the world made you think you were going to come anywhere close to the nomination?
If you're a cuck, you probably love that Mike Pence. That's all I'm saying. And I'm a cuck, and yet... Okay, so let me ask you this. Final thing. I want to ask you,
sure.
Speaking about presidential candidates, I mean, Ron DeSantis is obviously running now, the governor of Florida. He has used the word woke as a pejorative more than anybody. You strike me in this conversation as very woke. So I've been deeply offended by that the whole time. I've
got issues I work on.
Yeah, no, well, fair enough. No, I mean, I appreciate that. But like, I'm just joking. I mean, we had talked before I hit record about that word and about what it means and about how it's being used. So what are your thoughts on the woke revolution?
Well, first of all, as I said before, about
or the anti-woke, the anti-woke.
Yeah, and what the anti-woke is really about is, call it what it is. It's the don't make white people feel bad. And that's really what it is. Don't make white people feel bad.
But I also feel like that. I actually feel like that doesn't. That's a lot of it. It's a lot of it.
Right.
It's a lot of it because the word woke came from black people, like a lot of other cool things. But woke to me also means now liberal. It just means liberal. We're going to fight, and also specifically, obviously, gay. Anything that's not gay or frankly even Christian, it certainly started with anti-black and anti-CRT, but it's now gone into all these horrible things they're doing to trans folks, for which there are so few. But they're gaining so much ground off of it. And obviously...
because there used to be no trans people. And now it's kind of like the old saying, it's if there are two black guys in a room, at a party, and you walk around, enough, particularly if there are two, tall ones, there'll be several people who swear there are like 10. So, there's a small number of trans people.
There were a lot.
People now think they're everywhere.
Black people in that room.
Yes,
I think it's just this guy Marcus and Tony is all we saw. No, I saw several.
Yeah, it's a running joke about a couple of friends.
That's weird. I never heard that. It's obviously unsurprising. Yeah,
which gets even funnier when I think Chris Rock had said it, and several black friends and I will agree to this. He would say, all his black friends have lots of white friends. All his white friends have the same black friend.
Enough about Hootie. No, I can't. No disrespect to what's his name, Darius Rucker.
Darius Rucker.
No disrespect to Darius Rucker. I'm sorry.
That's right.
That's not fair.
Member of the Grand Ole Opry.
That's not
on his
fair.
way to probably
Is that right?
Country Music Hall of Fame. Yeah. He became a member about 10 years ago.
I interrupted you on the it's not just black. What else about woke?
Yeah, well, I think, again, a part of it is there are people who are very uncomfortable with changes that came in society. And I think especially with the flood of changes that came with great speed, and they're not ready for it.
Mm.
And I've often said there's no greater sense of entitlement than the idea that your past has to be somebody else's future.
Mm.
And when it comes to entitlement, that's what in many ways conservative is. And I don't mean to bash too much, because I do, as I said, we need conservatives because sometimes things do move too far, too fast. And you do need people sometimes, hey, let's figure this out. Let's go with it. But there has never been a great advance in social history led by conservatives. There's never been a great advance of social rights. I mean, those freedom of the founders, but I'm like, folks, you can say the founders were conservatives. The idea that you could rebel against your king, that was pretty doggone radical.
I feel like the way you're using conservative is that of a 53-year-old man. I don't think that word applies anymore. Now it's when I hear conservative, I'm like, well, which earth are you on? Are you on vaccine earth and election results earth? Or you?
Oh, I got to tell you, when I was in England, not the last time. I go back to England every year or so, and I remember I was there. Boris Johnson was giving, the Conservative Party was having a big meeting, and Boris Johnson was giving his speech. So I'm watching this on TV, and there's a point where he says, "And our automobiles are going to be the most fuel efficient, the most clean energy." He starts talking about all these things and they applaud. They're all applauding, and I'm like, that is something that no conservative would ever.
Right. Yeah, they don't have, that's a really interesting, they don't have the same type. They have culture wars in Europe, obviously, and in a lot of different ways, but they don't have I want to call it this kind of masculinity thing about like cars and guns. And it's more like conservatives are conservative about money. They want to make as much money as they can. So I don't care what your car looks like or what it runs on. We want to make money selling cars. And, they don't have a lot of that kind of stuff that we have here when it comes to I don't know. It's just such a different, obviously they have. It is one of the disadvantages, I think, of one, we're very large. And two, we do have so many different cultural norms across these, 50 states and our various territories. And it is hard sometimes for them to come. Look, I'm a gun owner. I like my guns. I have no desire to get rid of my guns. But at the same time, it's like, look, I don't need that gun over there that allows me to kill 40 people in 6 seconds. Only that, I'm guessing that you'll do whatever the government is asking you within reason to qualify to purchase a gun in terms of, regulations and background checks and forms that you have to fill out. And, lots of states make it very hard, like New York, to get a pistol. And other states allow you to carry, a machine gun open. Maybe not machine gun, but
and it's like somewhere in the middle.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I'm okay with the strictest gun laws in America because I still feel like they're not good enough. So I'm not maybe there where you are at it. But the point you're saying is, I think we're in agreement about, all kinds of different regulations and restrictions that would make it harder for certain types of people to get guns, make certain types of guns and ammunitions illegal to even buy or sell.
Yes. But the idea of that's never going to happen. Constitutionally, it can't happen. There is a right to a personal firearm. Certainly, there's no legal argument whatsoever against the right to have a firearm in your.
Was there a right to a personal firearm before 2008's Heller case?
Yes. Yeah, I think there was.
I forget how that goes, and I don't want to rant at a lawyer.
Yeah.
But listen, I'm going to wrap it there because we've taken up an hour of your time, and we're so grateful. And I think we have a new guest that we're going to really like to talk to on a lot of different issues more often. You are brilliant and honest and hilarious, and you've seen a lot. So it's real great to get you on here, and I'm sure people listening are gonna love having you here, and hopefully you'll come back with you're a new chair.
Sure. Well, I've got the standing desk, so I probably should just stand.
Oh God, do you really you're doing the standing desk thing? All right.
Dude, yeah. When you're my age and in my shape, I'm not the athlete I once was. You got to get your little exercises
in. What sport?
You
said you played football. What else?
Football, wrestling, 1 year swim team, baseball, roller derby.
What the? Wow, that's not in the bio.
Oh, well, there are times, Pete, where I look back at my life and I think, did I really do that?
Roller derby. I want a picture. Is there any photos of you doing roller derby?
Oh, sure. I'll send you some.
All right. I'll include them for subscribers only. I get to see Eric in his roller derby uniform.
Sure,
Thank you, Eric Anderson, so much for joining me. Really great. And we'll do it again soon.
My pleasure.
All right, there he goes, Eric Anderson. Check him out. Learn more about him in the show notes. Go say hi to him on Twitter. Follow him and let him know that you heard him here on the show so he knows there's lots of folks listening. So go over to Twitter, Eric Anderson Law. He is online at edalaw.com. I just think it's always really important to have conversations about the criminal justice system from the standpoint of people who are involved in it each and every day. So I thought that was really valuable and always important to stay aware of, stay connected to, and understand how horrific the criminal justice system is in this country, from arrest to incarceration, the courts and incarceration. It's just brutal and inhumane. And I think Eric Anderson did a great job at explaining that. And we'll keep talking about that issue here on this program as long as the microphone works and I'm able to do it. And I'm not able to do it without your subscription, so don't forget to subscribe to the show. And thank you to new subscribers. I got to give the shout out soon. But I've had a few people sign up, which is awesome. A few people updating their pledge, editing their pledge up, which is awesome. I'll give those shout outs as well. But now I have to end it, folks. I'm sorry. I've got to wrap it up here. But I'm going to wrap it up in a quote that I heard from a friend recently who I called when I was struggling with something. And his name is Wajahat Ali. You know him and you love him. And I was telling him about a problem I was dealing with and really needed his advice on. And you know what he said to me when I was having this very bad day? He said, Pete, today was a bad day. Accept it and move on, because tomorrow doesn't have to be a bad day. And maybe it won't be. And he was absolutely right. Tomorrow was a really good day. Thanks, Waj. It reminds me of my favorite Emerson quote. You've heard me say it many times if you've been listening for a long time or following me on social media. He said, finish each day and be done with it. You've done what you could. Some blunders and absurdities have crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. You shall begin it serenely and with too high a spirit to be encumbered with your old nonsense. Yeah, love it. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Take it away, John Carroll.
They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. Alright, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the dark.